Welcome, everyone, to Facilities U, a practical learning space for facilities and operations leaders navigating complexity, risk, and reliability in real-world environments. Today's session is Facilities U 201, Designing Reliable Facilities Operations in Healthcare Environments. This conversation is designed for facilities and operations leaders responsible for clinical uptime, compliance, vendor performance, and risk management in healthcare and dental settings. We're joined by Nick Straka, Director of Facilities at Kids Dental Brands. Nick brings over 9 years of healthcare facilities leadership experience, including extensive work in emergency preparedness, vendor strategy, capital decision-making, and operational excellence in regulated patient-facing environments. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to learn from your experiences.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. Before we dive in, to help set context a little bit for the listeners, can you briefly walk us through your current role and some of the scope of your responsibility day to day?
Yeah, so actually, about the end of October of last year, I actually onboarded into the director of facilities role for Kids Dental Brands. Whereas, previously I was with Heartland Dental for around 8.5 years. So this is definitely a step up in terms of what all myself and the team is handling. Day-to-day repair and maintenance requests, anything emergency escalations, a new caveat to obviously what we're doing on a facility side, what I'm not used to. So it's kind of like growing role is dental equipment. So we handle a lot of dental equipment requests. A large majority of our workload is through the dental equipment aspect, repairs and maintenance, installations, things like that. So
it's really funny how those little kind of like nuanced or niche aspects of the job can help. Because like when I oversaw a bunch of locations for Equinox, for example, and in my purview suddenly became like gym equipment and different things, right? But it almost like kind of broadens your horizon about how you can even approach like, the rudimentary part of facilities, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was always something that we, again, I would say but dating back to my time with Heartland Dental, we didn't dabble in dental equipment. There was another team that facilitated those requests. So it was always something that intrigued us. Again, growing value and creating worth, and not only that, but again that knowledge base. Hey, you work inside of a dental office, to have that expertise. It creates that value aspect. And so we didn't get a chance to. So obviously once I onboarded over here, I kind of wanted to be the subject matter expert overnight. Obviously that's not the case in this field, obviously always learning and growing. So I saw it as a huge benefit to kind of latch myself onto those that, are the experts or have extensive knowledge in that field.
Yeah, it sounds like your career has a large foundation in this area and kind of some of the things that are, really important with like patient care, compliance, safety, right? Some of the kind of nuanced parts of that job for you, from your experience, what fundamentally differentiates, internal healthcare management from other environments, and like how has that shaped your approach to leadership?
Yeah, I feel like that's a question that's really brought up in large kind of networking sessions, those benchmarking sessions. Everybody would see it as a difference. In my opinion, in talking with them, I don't see too much of a difference from what I consider like the medtel, the medical retail space, and the C-suites. Again, there's an emphasis on customer service. In most cases, my customer is our offices, our dental offices, where then in turn, their patients are their customers. So at the end of the day, making sure that we're supporting our offices, our doctors, at the top tier of support is obviously my primary focus. And then just making sure that everything that, we do has an emphasis on like, reporting back to them, sharing every aspect of, where our work order life cycle is, and making sure that they're satisfied with the work that we do. And like I said, in talking with other FMs, that's kind of the same. I feel like that's the same blueprint, is making sure that their customer at the end of the day is receiving the utmost care, and that at the same time, repair, maintenance, beautification of the space is at the highest priority.
When you speak about kind of the patient safety and support being, again, paramount to like everyday decision making on yourself, because when operational breakdowns happen, it's not just inconvenience, right? It affects patient care and it affects like regulatory exposure. So what are some healthcare specific systems or processes that you've maybe seen strained or any kind of elements of risk that, proactively someone in your sector can kind of be on the lookout for and can help them, make sure that none of these processes are falling through the cracks, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that at the end of the day, whenever you see systems and processes, I mean, I think you want to take it to everyday. I mean, I know me personally over time. I even, whenever I talk to other individuals, my first thing is like, okay, what's your system and what's your process? So the system is, how it repeats itself, steps like 1 through 10. And then does everybody else know that? So for me, as soon as, you ask that, to me, the first and foremost is like just your ample forms of communication. So like, how does somebody reach you? How are you how are you able to receive the communication? Are you in communication back with, that person, that entity, whoever it is, whether it be a service partner, the office, the doctor, landlords, property managers, what is your communication pathway? Is it, is there a certain standard? Do you prefer that email? Do you prefer, I think that once we can generalize from a facility standpoint, like what's our preferred method of communication? Because everybody's different. From what I've seen, everybody, would prefer phone calls. Some people would prefer emails. Some people would prefer Teams messaging. And in the world of, kind of that social media aspect, quicker is better, so if I can get my, the information out there as quick as possible without little downtime, I feel like in the end, everybody seems a lot more satisfied. And so, like I said, just understanding communication is king, and that it doesn't matter how it's coming across, as long as you can understand and align within the team. Hey, this is our method. I think that you have a really good opportunity for success at the end of the day.
Yeah, having coworkers and having met people in the industry that are either facilities managers for hospitals or anything within that healthcare kind of sector, they talked about having to react to emergencies, having to react to inspections, clinical disruptions, whatever. So, from your experience, what are some of the long-term consequences of remaining reactive, right? Not having those plans in place and not, the cliche is proactivity over reactivity, right? But it's like, especially in the healthcare sector, like, what is that like? What is that balance like for you on a daily basis?
Well, I mean, again, the first thing I think of is just the biggest, the biggest driver behind it is just the challenge with cost. Everything that we're looking at from an aspect standpoint is like, okay, anything that impedes or impacts operation is impacting revenue. If we can't get somebody inside the office, if we can't support a patient, that's impacting revenue. And in turn, not only is it costing us per patient, but it's costing us even in a bigger factor. And then to get somebody in office is also costing us. So you're almost doubling that in everything you do. I know one of the biggest, kind of eye openers for me was in a greater scale. One of the companies that I worked for previously didn't really put an emphasis on preventative maintenance. And, that was kind of second nature. Do I really need that? I think I could do that myself. There wasn't, kind of this, there was like a whole re-education purpose behind what are the benefits of proactive maintenance. And so everything is, 3 times, 5 times, whenever you think of everything's reactive. And so getting more of a proactive mindset as you continue to progress through like a facilities team life cycle, again, we're still at a really early and really exciting stage with Kids Dental Brands, with where we are, to be able to have the levels of communication, to be able to show the benefits of what maintenance can really do for your office, for your teams, and then in turn for your patients. Because if you're not open, for anything reactive, it's not only hurting revenue, but you've got patients out there that you're still trying to support. So if you're not open, you can't do that.
Yeah, and I think about, you mentioned those kind of capital decisions, right? And kind of cost efficiency and things like that. I think, repair versus replace is like the number one kind of thing that we come across every day, right? It's like that, at what point do you kind of continue to put money into an asset or continue to kind of make repairs versus, purchasing new equipment? how is that kind of affected in your area in terms of, I think about friends of mine that work in a hospital. There's a certain kind of circulated air that has to go into a healthcare environment, things like that. So, what is the nuance to your repair versus replace when you're kind of in that space, when you're kind of in that healthcare area?
Yeah, well, I would say again, full focus is in to be able to replace it or repair it in a less critical time of need. So, not 100 degrees in the middle of the summer would probably be ideal. Luckily for us, we're not really guided by a certain metric whenever it comes to the amount of clean air that's being cycled. But obviously, having a standard whenever it comes to air efficiency, ensuring that you're having good, clean, conditioned air getting cycled through the office. And for us, it was making sure that being able to not only tag our assets, get them into whatever work order platform system that we have, which, we currently have a basis. I was able to move from a similar platform to the same platform where I'm at now. And so being able to go in and tag those assets, understand where they're at in their life cycle. So if something is getting to a critical state, we can have those discussions internally, with doctors, with operations, and say, hey, listen, we're getting pretty close. We're using R22 refrigerant or R410, that stuff is starting to get phased out. And with the EPA, regulations and restrictions that are coming down the pipe, let's prepare rather than, again, we talk about reactive versus proactive, rather than get to that point and say, well, let's do everything right now, because then the price is just going to jump. And so to be able to piece all this together and say, hey, the things I want to know is, what's the age, what's the refrigerant type, and, what's the reputable cost to replace it. Those are typically a lot of times whenever talking with leadership is trying to piece those things together. What's, how old it is, is the refrigerant out of date? And then what's it going to cost for us to replace it?
Got it. A big part of that repair versus replace part is vendor relationships, right? The service providers that we choose to team up with that are in charge of taking care of our buildings, right?
Yeah.
What are some ways that have you kind of inherited some vendors? Have you teamed with service providers? Are you, how do you kind of balance that vendor relationship where it's like, time can be so prescient, right? Like I put myself in the shoes of someone who needs a root canal, tooth killing me. I'm in for next Tuesday. There's not an option that the office can be closed that day for me, because that's like, it's kind of how prescient it is. So, you got to have the right vendors that are going to be on time. They're going to show up. They're going to do the stuff that they say they're going to do overnight so you can open the next day. So, talk about a little bit about your vendors and how you kind of form that relationship with them.
Well, I'm sure this one pretty well. I mean, I'm sure your experience, whenever it comes, I learned early on in some capacity that, as much, and this is at no, disrespect to any of our vendor partners out there or any of our past, I've just learned over time, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I can do everything and I can do everything everywhere and I can do it really well, it's just a misconception, and not to say they're selling, any untruth or, but I've just learned and understood it's better to find people that have niches, and could, support, whether it be my team or an office or a group of offices, and be really good at one or two things, So if their trade is plumbing and they can do it in South Florida for, 10 to 15 locations and they do it really well, that's where I want you at, and unfortunately I experienced early on where it was really a lesson learned for me. It's, not everything is what it seems. So what I started doing was I looked at everything as a true partnership and a relationship, because at the end of the day, I moved through them. And that's what I like to tell everybody in, quarterly business reviews. We move as you do. If I contract you to walk into an office and support us, you're an extension of my team. So any failure in that office isn't just a failure on you. It's a failure on me and my team. And we don't take that stuff lightly. Usually what I'll say is, over communication is the easiest path, to success for us. I mean, going back to communication, that's one thing that we put into our key performance indicators, or I did last year, was, communication wasn't listed. Now it is. And there's a reason for that, because everything is based off of it. And so, I look at everything as it is what it is. It's a relationship, and we've got to keep working on it. We don't look at that, as soon as you strike out the first time, I'm done with you. Now, again, there are serious issues. If there was something as serious, then we'll definitely review that. But, definitely want to make sure that everybody understands I make mistakes. What are we going to do to find a resolution or a solution to the mistake? And then let's move forward. I don't want to compound problems on top of problems. I brought you here to help solve those. So if all you're going to do is create more, let's find somebody else, because I'm sure there's plenty of other people that are looking for the same line of work. So just creating good partnerships and understanding where the relationship lies.
Yeah, for anyone that's, and obviously a big part of this podcast series is trying to kind of provide information for people that may be like within your field, and maybe, like aspiring people that may want to end up having the professional growth that you've experienced. So for someone watching, like, what are some early warning signs that maybe like a vendor relationship is introducing some operational or compliance risk, right? Is it scheduling, communication, quality of work? Like, what are some things you've seen that are like very early indicators?
Yeah, I usually, and again, I'm pretty easygoing whenever it comes to some of that stuff. Now, again, there are a few things, like if we jump on a call, like, we jump on an introductory call, and the first thing I say is, you're going to hear me repeat the communication line over and over again. Again, it's like any relationship. If you have a significant other, they're going to tell you just don't communicate. You just don't. There's a reason why I kind of use that kind of same philosophy. You have to over communicate. A lot of things, whenever it comes to key, those key performance indicators are tied to communication, and people just don't realize that. And so for me, if we have that introductory call and there's some sense of alignment on what my standards are, and within the first work order or the first few work orders, I'm seeing the same lines, we're having a hard time navigating, the call before, the check-in, check-out, making sure that you let the team know, or there's over communication, or maybe the wrong level of communication with inside the office, then usually I'll throw that up and say, hey, let's reconvene and figure out what we missed on here. Because usually that's usually a telltale sign for me, is if we have this call, everybody agrees, during that introductory call, that, oh yeah, we do this, we do that, we do it all well. And it's usually like, okay, I'm going to go into this with kind of the eyes wide open and letting them experience how we operate. And if it doesn't go well, in that first work order or first two work orders, it's on me to bring everybody back together and say, here's the way that we prefer things to be done. Are we in agreement? And if at that point we feel like it's still not in alignment, I think it's probably one of those things where we need to revisit it. Like, hey, maybe this isn't a fit after all. And that's fine. Yeah. Some situations aren't fit for everybody. And, like I said, I've experienced a few of those, and, there's still vendors out there that I still talk to, even though it just didn't work out with inside of a realm. I think we can all still be professionals and understand, it's better to go our separate ways rather than, do damage to one another.
Yeah. And definitely, having had that experience before, we're like, yeah, maybe a vendor didn't work out in a particular place or in your particular role, but then, keeping that communication line open, they may be a fit down the road, right? You never want to burn those bridges.
Yes.
You never want to kind of, I don't know, take out your emergency, whatever resources, And as someone who's kind of, led facilities teams through those kind of high pressure situations, what are some leadership behaviors that kind of become non-negotiable to you, right? You've said communication. Communication appears to be paramount when it comes to your daily operations. Any other kind of like non-negotiable leadership things that you found success with and you would recommend to anyone else in this field?
Yeah. Again, I'm sure I could beat everybody over the head with the communication, but another, I would say a similar term is transparency. Being transparent as a leader inside of this industry for me personally, and this is really all I've known. I mean, whenever I stepped into the FM side, it's always been in, the dental space. So I went from, one dental support organization to another, ever since I've been growing. And I feel like from a leadership perspective, there's one thing that I've truly valued. I mean, amongst, regardless of whatever team I've been, it's whenever the leader is transparent, being open, honest, with me on what direction something's going. If I fail, I want you to let me know, how can I correct it? Because if we just continuously do the same thing over and over again, I feel like it's a recipe for disaster. So, if we have a hiccup, if we have an issue, and, I definitely want somebody to tell me, up front. And again, from an accountability standpoint, I also, I view that as a non-negotiable. Again, being accountable. If a situation goes south or something happens, just own up to it, and let's figure out a way to get through it. So we've got tons of problems in the FM world. We need to start being solvers. So just saying, hey, that's on me. We'll correct it, move on, and those are two of the things where I look at and say those are things you just can't be without in this industry.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, that trust and transparency that you speak about, it's like when you have that with your vendors, when you have that with your maintenance managers, when you have that with members of your team, like it just makes every day easier because, the last thing you want to do is, you're constantly thinking about, proactivity. The easiest way to be reactive is to find something out at the last minute, right? To have something drop on your plate that you could have known about well ahead of time, right? So I could not second that idea of honesty and transparency more,
Yeah. And again, I think from a leadership's perspective, I mean, even further up above me, I think the last thing that any leader would want is for something in an additional leadership role for them to come and say, hey, what happened? And the first thing that we do is start pointing fingers each way. I mean, at the end of the day, the buck starts and stops with me, in my opinion. And so if something fails with inside the facilities team, it's a direct reflection on me, and that's where the correction needs to be made. It's not somebody else's fault. No, it's, again, if I'm tabbed as a leader, as a manager, or, leader of people, the expectation is, I continue to help them lead and grow because, we want at some point in time, I think we want to, others to mature into a leadership role and grow into leadership roles. So that failure is definitely on us. And so again, that accountability piece as well is just, making sure that you take the good with the bad and move forward.
Yeah, that is very practical advice. We appreciate it. As we begin to wrap up here, we like to try to end every episode with something practical, something that, a facilities manager can kind of walk away with and use today to help strengthen their approach. So especially for healthcare or dental facilities leaders, what's one practice that someone should start and what's one habit they should try to stop, right? Like I'm thinking about in the gym space. One habit that we needed to start was more preventative maintenance on the bigger items, right? Like our HVAC components, things like that. As our HVAC started to age, and some of the buildings in Los Angeles, we were dealing with HVAC units from the 80s and 90s, right? So that was something that we started, and something we stopped doing was kind of assuming that, not going to a location the day after a vendor went there, right? And just getting eyes on it, making sure that everything was completed specifically. So, what are kind of two practical things from your perspective that a facilities manager can start doing and stop doing today?
Yeah, I would say for me, it's not so much about the job, the job in itself, but more in terms of just with inside the team. Because I'm a firm believer. I came from a really great team and was fortunate enough to join another. And so some of the things that I did while I was there, with my team and brought over here was ensuring that there was a weekly or bi-weekly touch base with my group. Regardless of size, I think it's important to get the team together and listen to, kind of those struggles, those lessons learned. And then not only that, but, kind of put emphasis on wins, because, in our line of work, we're catching a lot of fires, right? A lot of, living life by the fire hose, taking all the bad. I mean, everything's an emergency, everything's an escalation. And so I think, being able to sit amongst our peers and to say, hey, I had a, 200, day old work order that I finally got completed this week. People understand how much joy that brings individuals with inside of our realm. And so I don't want to ever minimize that. And so for me, it's always been about, making sure I keep that team building aspect. As a coach, I've always looked at culture as built around team. You can't sit here and claim culture and not put an emphasis on the team, right? And so that's where I put my foundation and say, hey, let's get together. Let's talk about some of the things that we've had problems with this week. And maybe you haven't experienced it, but somebody across from you, with inside your own group has probably handled the same thing. Everybody's years of experience, and you can jump around the industry and experience something different. So why silo yourself and say, hey, I'm dealing with this. I can handle it myself. I don't need somebody else. No, that's not what we need. The team grows together. I mean, if we fail as one, then, we're no good as a team. So, making sure that we have those connections throughout the week. And then, for the most part, I would say is, just making sure we're kind of in your same realm of the preventative maintenance. The quick fixes aren't everything, right? I think that there's been a lot of emphasis on like, well, how quick can we get this done? If you want to do it right, it's going to take some time. And so I would say having the ability to continue to coach, not only your team, but others around you that, if Rome wasn't built in a day, everything great takes time. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're putting more emphasis on that preventative maintenance piece. And, I'm all for building programs that kind of reduce all that reactive, handyman programs, window cleanings and things like that really make sure that we're putting a prime emphasis on those locations and not letting things fall through their cracks. Because at the end of the day, I know our doctors and teams, their focus is on their patients, and so for me, I want my focus to be on the facility and how we support them. So the only thing we can do is start building things out to kind of churn out throughout the life cycle and not handle everything where they're picking up the phone and trying to handle patients at the same time.
Yeah. And two things that really stood out there. One was that, as a facilities manager, we can Band-Aid something. Like if we can get something up and running, but you mentioned that kind of, people want to find out how fast something can come up. We can Band-Aid it, but it's so much better when there's that plan afterwards, right? You just don't want to make that temporary repair without having a forecast about what is that going to look like 3, 6, 9 months down the road, and how much money do you put into that Band-Aiding, where we could have bought the component, we could have made a slightly larger upgrade. Okay, maybe downtime is 48 hours, but now this problem is solved for the next couple of years, right?
Yes.
And, I think the other thing that stood out, and I think this is only something that a facilities manager can relate to, when you see that work order with the triple digit number, like 108 days, and you finally get that thing closed, man, does anything feel better when you've just been staring at that one work order and the days just keep going up, right?
Yeah. No, again, and that was kind of the first thing that I looked at whenever I came over to Kid Steel & Brands is, I run through the work orders and see what our time to resolutions are. And, I know when I, coming over from Heartland, I remember just talking with the team and their subtle wins on, that and just the joy that it brought them. I feel like more and more, because we have so much going on, everybody's like, man, that could have been an email type situation. It doesn't have to be a quick meeting. I mean, again, a touch base is, could be anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes a day. Like I said, mine right now is on a weekly cadence for one day. And really, if we need to expand out on that, then we can we can definitely do that. But at the end of the day, I never will want my team to feel like they can't share those moments. So.
Well, Nick, I really want to thank you for being so open with us and
Yeah.
and being so willing to share your experiences today. The lessons that you were able to share with us, about like reliability, emergency preparedness, vendor strategy, leadership, all the things that we kind of touched upon, decision making under pressure. I mean, that's exactly what we're hoping that Facilities U is providing to everybody and what we're kind of striving for. To everyone listening, this was Facilities U 201, designing reliable facilities operations in healthcare environments. These are the type of operational challenges we study deeply alongside healthcare facilities teams navigating regulated, high-stakes environment. If this conversation resonated with you, know that you're not alone in navigating these challenges. We look forward to continuing the learning in future Facilities U sessions. Thank you for joining us. And Nick, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, take care.